friends, you're in the Military with Summary channel, and this video we're going to discuss the most important events that took place during the previous 12 hours. We have lots of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first we're going to talk about the conflict on the territory of Ukraine, where the Russians continue their major offensive operation. And first let's talk about the Sumy direction. We received additional changes on the ground in this area. As we can see, currently the Russians attack the territory of Sumy region in the area of the city of Sumy, at least from three directions: in the area of the second defense layer, in the area of the settlement of Miropolye, and in the direction of the city of Krasnopolye. Let's discuss every single direction because we have changes. And first we're going to talk about the second defense layer, and it seems that according to information we have, the Russians began assault operation on the settlement by the name of Novosich. I would like to remind you that just 2 days ago the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation and the group of forces north stated that the Russians, as a result of clashes, established complete control over the settlement by the name of Korchakovka. And during the previous nights we received a report that first infiltration groups of the armed forces of the Russian Federation have entered the settlement of Novosich, and currently there are very heavy clashes. Furthermore, as you can see, according to these changes, the Russians are about to finish the battle for this big forest to the north of Novosich. So it seems that currently the Russians are tasked to establish complete control over the territories. This configuration will improve the Russian position significantly, and the most important is that with this configuration of the front line, the Russians will be able to begin concentration of their troops in this area on the brigade level. So up to one brigade the Russians would be able to concentrate through these villages and this big forest. At the same time, the Ukrainians are trying to concentrate their troops in the area of the settlement of Marina. The Russians see everything, and the Russians bomb and attack this territory with aviation. In this video we can see how the Russians were bombing positions and concentration of troops of the armed forces of Ukraine that were trying to regroup themselves before another counter-offensive operation with the purpose to stabilize the situation through the second defense layer. Another important direction is the Miropolye direction. As you can see, we have a lot of icons in this area. During the previous 12 hours, neutral mappers confirmed that the Russians, as a result of clashes in this direction during the previous days, have improved their position significantly. So we can say right now that the settlement of Miropolye is about to be captured by Russians. According to information we have, according to the latest changes, probably within the next week, within the next 5 or 7 days, the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation will confirm complete control over the territory. As of now, the Ukrainians are trying to control just the territory along T-1901 road, so we are talking about this part, because from these positions the Ukrainians still have possibilities to evacuate towards the settlement of Zapsilye, and from the same village the Ukrainians still have possibilities to introduce fresh forces for resistance, so which means that the next several days will see very fierce clashes in this area. Furthermore, the Ukrainians control the most southern parts of the settlement. This is a safe part of the settlement. From these positions the Ukrainians have strong roads, strong rotation, evacuation and supply lines that the Ukrainians use to support their contingent in this part of the settlement. But both parts of the settlement of Miropolye most likely the Ukrainians would lose within the next several days. And the southeastern Sumy direction, during the previous 12 hours we just received several clarifications about the situation on the ground. Just to remind you that 3 days ago the Minister of Defense and the group of forces north stated that the Russians, as a result of clashes, established complete control over the settlement of Novodmitrievka, and 2 days, during the previous 2 days, we were receiving just clarifications about the current situation on the ground. So according to the different mappers, the Russians improved their positions further in the western direction of the settlement of Novodmitrievka, and it seems that the Russians have captured this big part of the forest. You know that this is a very big mistake of the Ukrainian side to lose these parts of this big forest, because the Russians can use these parts of big forest as a protection, as defense against the Ukrainian drones. So you know, the Ukrainians they think and they believe that drones and investments and drone technologies can allow the Ukrainians to win the conflict against the Russian Federation. But the main problem of any type of drone, of course, is different types of protections. We see that the Sumy direction has a very big forest, and the Russians are trying to use this big forest, and the Ukrainians, due to all these trees and so on, are not able to use their drones in full strength, which means that the Russians are using this situation and that the Russians continue advancing. At some point, these offensives from the Russian side will force the Ukrainians to introduce additional forces in the area of the city of Sumy with the purpose to fight with the Russians using the, let's say, old warfare technologies like without drones in forest. But this will lead to the situation that when some direction will start suffering huge problems with manpower, and the Russians will be able to improve their position somewhere else. The Kharkiv direction. During the previous 12 hours, we just received additional clarifications about the situation on the ground. Just to remind you that yesterday, according to the Group of Forces North and the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation, the Russians have finished the battle for the settlement of Pokolyana. Based on the reports that we had yesterday, we have adjusted the map, as you can see. And today we received additional clarifications that the Russians managed to improve their positions and to take the next 3 lines to the settlement under complete control. Furthermore, the Russians continue improving their positions in the most northeastern parts of the Kharkiv region. The Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation probably 5 or 6 days ago reported that the Russians captured the settlement of Zemlyaniki, and the Russians didn't stop after this. The Russians continue offensive operation, and this is the picture by the beginning of the 2nd of May of 2026. The southern parts of the settlement of Budarki was captured, and additional territories are along the border. So as for the Kharkiv direction, we see that the Russians are attacking. The Russians attack positions of the armored forces currently from 2 directions, mainly through the northern border between the Russian Federation and Ukraine in the Kharkiv region. The Kupiansk direction. During the previous 12 hours, we received lots of very interesting updates, and probably the most important one is this one. Pro-Russian sources published a video. A Russian storm group has conducted a clearance operation in a forest area south of the settlement of Kostiantynivka in the Kharkiv region. The area surrounding the village and the adjacent forest had not been a gray zone until recently. So the Russians, and this video wasn't geolocated, we added this video softly, but the Russians are saying that during the previous day there were very heavy clashes for this forest, and as a result of offensive operation, the Russians managed to secure this territory. Once again, this video wasn't geolocated, and this video could be made in any place, but the author decided to use this video to describe the situation around the settlement of Kostiantynivka. But if this information is correct, then the front line in the Kupiansk direction differs from what you can see right now. If the report about the clashes around the village of Kostiantynivka is correct, then most likely front line in this area looks like this. The Russians during the previous days managed to improve their position significantly, and the Russians continue offensive operation deep inside of the Kharkiv region with the purpose to encircle completely the territory between Belый Kolodец, Malый Burluk, Veliki Burluk, and the Pechenegi water reservoir. And as for the Kupiansk itself, we have changes on the western bank of the river, and these are the changes on the ground. So during the previous nights, neutral mappers confirmed that the Russians once again managed to improve their position significantly. The Russians right now establish strong control over the settlement, and the Russians continue advancing not just on the western bank of the river but also on the eastern bank. These are the changes on the ground that were provided by different mappers. We see that the Ukrainians have less and less territories under their control in the area of the Kupiansk agglomeration, and another reason why it's happening because the Ukrainians have huge problems with manpower. Now let's talk about the Kostiantynivka direction. During the previous 12 hours, the map was adjusted once again. We have lots of very interesting updates on this matter. And first, we're going to talk about the southwestern direction. I will discuss the changes. This is the end of the 1st of May. This is the beginning of the 2nd of May. As you can see, the Russians, as a result of clashes, managed to establish complete control over this multi-story block of the settlement of Kostiantynivka through its western part, which means that currently the Russians have a very strong foothold through the western and the eastern parts and the southern parts of the city. We can say that by the morning of the 2nd of May of 2026, the Russians have captured up to 25% of the city of Kostiantynivka. The Russians have a very powerful foothold, and which means that most likely the Ukrainians from now on are not able to force the Russians to fall back from positions they managed to take under complete control, which means that this is something like a turning point. The only thing that Ukrainians are able to do right now is to slow down the Russians and to win some time, maybe even to stop the Russians. But one thing is clear: from now on, the Ukrainians are no longer able to force the Russians to fall back from the territories they captured. So this is the situation in Kostiantynivka. Most likely the Russians were planning to establish complete control over the territory of the city before the end of May's holiday spots. We see that this haven't happened and most likely won't happen, but obviously that by the end of May we'll see significant changes on the ground in this area, and the map will differ significantly from the configuration of the front line that you can see right now in front of your screens. The Russians continue offensive operation, and during the upcoming days we are waiting for additional changes. And according to this configuration, the front line, we believe that first of all, in incoming days, the Russians will finish the battle for the territory between these, for the southwest and the south and the western parts of the city, between these water natural barriers. Now let's move further. As for the Zaporozhye direction, this morning pro-Ukrainian sources published several videos of very heavy clashes in this part of the settlement of Primorska. We haven't geolocated these videos, but it seems that the Ukrainians, as a result of counter-offensive operation, managed to recapture and to establish complete control over the territories between the villages of Gavrilovka and the river of Kinska and the settlement of Stepnogor. So most likely in coming days, this big pocket would be colored in yellow color as the territory under complete control of the armed forces of Ukraine. We have probably proofs about this, but let's wait and see, and then we will do everything. Furthermore, during the previous nights, both the Russians and the Ukrainians once again attacked each other with drones. This is the map of the Ukraine attack. The sources stated that Ukrainians used up to 200 drones to attack the territory of Russia. As of the moment when I started making this video, we still haven't received anything that can confirm or to show us the results of attack. The only video we have is the video from the city of Tuapse, and here we can see the consequences of previous attacks that were carried out by the Ukrainians. As you can see, there is still a very big fire, and that still the Russian emergency services haven't managed to stabilize the situation. We haven't received anything about reconnaissance drones in the Black Sea, which means that the Russians probably have from 1 to 3 days to stabilize the situation before the next massive attack in this direction. Another important update is the statement about Witkov and Karchner. According to media, Witkov and Karchner postponed their visit to Kiev. They no longer believe in negotiations. Moreover, it's difficult for billionaire Witkov to travel by train. According to this statement, we understand that most likely during the next 3 months we won't see any peace process between the Russian Federation and the Ukrainian side, probably due to the Ukrainians' prolonged martial law and demobilization, and most likely only by the end of the summer we will see first signals that parties, or at least the Russians or maybe the Ukrainians, are ready for the negotiation process. But obviously everything will depend on the situation in the United States of America, and the most important, everything will depend on results of midterm elections. Now let's finish let's cover the situation in the western Mali, in the area of the responsibilities of the Russian African Corps. During the previous night we received lots of updates, and according to information we have, during the previous night the separatists were trying to answer the